You're not family. You're just the janitor who keeps showing up. That's what my son said, not behind closed doors, not in a whisper. He said it in front of his Ivy League friends, at the end of year student dinner, standing tall in his tailored blazer while I stood in the back, holding the mop I had just put down so I could hear his speech. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and walked away. Because when you've spent your whole life scrubbing cafeteria floors just to pay for someone else's future, words like that don't sting the same way. They don't cut, they cauterize. I raised that boy on my own. Woke up at 3 a.m. for double shifts. Skipped meals to save for his textbooks. I even hid my job from his classmates so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Turns out, he was still embarrassed, but not in the way I thought. He wasn't ashamed of me. He was ashamed by me. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My silence, my sacrifices, and my love had raised a young man who thought status was worth more than loyalty, and that the hand that fed him was too dirty to be acknowledged in public. So I made a decision. I didn't shout. I didn't scold. I simply waited for the next tuition invoice. Because you can call me a janitor all you want, but this janitor was the only reason he hadn't been buried under 6 figures of debt. And what happened next, no one saw coming. I used to believe that hard work could fix anything, that if you showed up every day, paid your dues, and kept your head down, life would reward you. That belief carried me through some of the darkest days of my life. I became a father at 22. Her name was Melissa, and she left 2 months after our son Nathan was born. No note, no goodbyes. Just a crib, a screaming baby, and a young man with calloused hands and no idea how formula worked. But I figured it out. I got a night job cleaning office buildings and a day job mopping floors at a local high school. I slept 3 hours a night. My arms were always sore. My feet always ached. But I was there for Nathan. Always. He never knew we were poor. That was intentional. I made his lunch every morning, packed it with a little note, and smiled as he ran to the school bus. I sewed his Halloween costumes by hand, even when I didn't know what the hell a Gundam was. I stood at every parent-teacher meeting in faded jeans, pretending not to notice the other dads in their expensive watches and cufflinks. I told myself it didn't matter, because Nathan was kind, curious, bright-eyed, and brilliant. He loved building things. When he was 12, he made a working model of a solar-powered water pump from scrap materials. His science teacher called me and said, "He's got a mind that could change the world." So I decided I would do everything to give him the chance. When he got into Columbia on partial scholarship, I took a third job. When he said he wanted to study engineering and economics, I sold the truck my father left me to afford his books. When he asked if I could attend his orientation, I said yes, and then lied about a family emergency because I couldn't afford the train ticket. Still, I kept paying, quietly, proudly. I had never walked through the gates of an Ivy League university, but I knew my son had, and that was enough for me. At least it was. Until that dinner, I had come to surprise him. I'd been working on campus as a night janitor for the last semester under a contract with a cleaning company Columbia outsourced. It made me feel close to him, even if he never knew. That night, I'd just finished buffing the floors of the main hall when I heard applause and saw a banner that read, "Honoring Our Future Leaders." Nathan was at the podium. He looked so confident, so sharp, like everything I'd worked for had been worth it. Then someone in the audience, one of his classmates, I assume, pointed at me in the back and said, "Hey, someone forgot to take out the trash." The room chuckled. Nathan glanced over his shoulder. His eyes met mine. For a moment, I thought he might say something. A smile, a nod, anything. Instead, he laughed along with them and said, "Don't worry, that's just the janitor. He's not family." The words hung in the air like smoke. He didn't move. He didn't cry. I just turned around and walked back to the service corridor, where I picked up my gloves and kept working like nothing had happened. But inside me, something had shifted. Something cold and sharp and irreversible. Not because he embarrassed me, because he erased me. The next morning, I called the university's financial office and asked a simple question. What happens when a third-party tuition payer stops making payments mid-semester? The answer was exactly what I expected. The student gets a notification, then a warning, and then, if no payment is made, Registration gets suspended. Housing and meal plans too. No drama, no threats. Just a quiet administrative guillotine. I thanked the clerk and hung up. That night, I went to work as usual. Gloves on, mop bucket rolling, head down. Same halls, same faces. But something inside me had changed. I stopped sending payments, but I didn't tell Nathan. I didn't call. I didn't text. I wanted him to feel the confusion of a system he thought he had mastered, suddenly slipping through his fingers. I wanted him to look around and wonder, what's happening? Why now? 2 weeks passed. Then came the call. "Dad," he said, voice rushed, irritated. "Did you forget to send the tuition transfer? I got a weird email from the bursar." I paused. "Did I?" I said, feigning surprise. "Maybe the routing number changed. You know, janitor stuff, we're not so good with paperwork." There was a pause on his end. "Ah, hesitation?" Then he scoffed. "Seriously, can you not mess this up? I've got midterms next week and I don't need more stress." No apology, no thanks. Just a demand wrapped in entitlement. I told him I'd look into it. He didn't. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope from the top drawer of my dresser, the one labeled Nathan Tuition and Expenses. Every receipt, every wire transfer, every work hour logged. I flipped through them like chapters in a novel I had written alone. Do you know how much a single semester at Columbia costs without full aid? Saint-Gilles. Ling, multiply that by 6 semesters so far. I had paid over $200,000. As a janitor, with no complaints, no recognition, no regret. Until now, another week passed. He didn't call again, but I got a letter Columbia University addressed to me. Inside, a warning about delinquent payments and the consequences if the balance wasn't cleared within 10 business days. I folded it neatly and placed it beside my coffee mug on the counter. I stared at it and I smiled, because for the first time in 2 decades, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: power. I had let myself believe that love meant giving endlessly, that to be a good father, you had to endure every wound in silence, every slight without pushback. That was the lie, the beautiful lie. But here's the truth. Respect is not a byproduct of sacrifice. It has to be taught, it has to be earned, and it must be demanded when absent. That weekend, I requested time off. I didn't tell anyone why. I just packed a single envelope and boarded a northbound train to New York City. I arrived outside Nathan's dorm at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. The look on his face when he opened the door, bedheaded, bleary-eyed, half-dressed, wasn't joy. It was confusion. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I handed him the envelope. Inside was a printed ledger of every tuition payment I had made, highlighted, annotated, tracked down to the hour I'd worked each month to afford them. No words, just numbers. He flipped through it slowly. Then he looked up at me. "What is this?" I met his eyes. For the first time, I didn't look down. I didn't shrink. "That's what a janitor does," I said softly. "That's how family pays." And without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked away. 3 days later, I received a voicemail. "Dad, I got a notice. They're holding my registration. I can't sit for finals unless tuition is paid. Please, can we talk?" He didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my own email and labeled it Recognition, First Contact. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. I wanted Nathan to truly understand not just what I did, but what he had become. By the end of that week, the silence had matured into panic. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, wearing the same entitled confusion he'd worn at the dorm door. "I don't understand," he said, pacing. "You've always paid. Why stop now?" I studied him. The way his words still assumed entitlement, as if the river that had flowed so long should never dry, regardless of the drought upstream. I walked to my closet, pulled out another folder. Inside was a signed legal document, a revocable education trust I'd established when Nathan was 12, listing me as both trustee and custodian. It included a clause: funds may be suspended at the sole discretion of the trustee if the beneficiary displays willful misconduct, dishonor, or brings reputational harm to the grantor. I handed it to him. He stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. "You planned this?" he asked, voice rising. "No. I said calmly. I planned for your future. You planned your own fall. He stood in silence, and then finally he sat. That was the first twist. He sat. Not as a son demanding answers, but as a child seeking to understand something bigger than himself. I didn't mean it that night, he said softly. You did, I replied. And that's the point. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked the first honest question he had spoken in years. Why didn't you ever tell me you were paying for all this? I walked to the window and looked out. Because I wanted you to believe you earned it, I said. That you were there because of your own merit. Because I thought if you didn't carry the weight of money, you could carry the weight of dreams. There was a long silence behind me. Then he said something that broke me just a little. I thought you were ashamed of your job. That's why you never came around. I turned and looked at him. Truly looked at him. No, Nathan, I said. I wasn't ashamed of my job. I was ashamed that you might be. That was the real twist. He had spent years trying to rise above me, not realizing I had lifted him the entire time. In the weeks that followed, he took on a part-time job at the campus library. He appealed to financial aid and began looking into scholarships. He moved out of the elite dorms and into shared housing with 4 other students. I watched from a distance, quiet, steady, observing. That was the second rise, not mine, but his. But me? I began to rise in a different way. One of the professors, Dr. Karen Levy, chair of the engineering department, had overheard parts of what happened. She reached out to me through a university liaison and asked if I would consider speaking at a community event on parental sacrifice and education. I declined at first, but then I thought, maybe there's power in showing the world that dignity doesn't wear a suit. So I spoke. One night, one microphone, one truth, and the room stood still. Afterwards, a few students came up to me, some with tears, others with shame in their eyes. One said, "My dad's a truck driver. I haven't called him in months. I think I need to." That was the third rise. Not in money, in meaning, and for the first time in years, I felt like more than a janitor. I felt like a father again. Columbia hosts an annual event each spring for its top-performing students, the Vanguard Circle Banquet. It's where donors, faculty, alumni, and rising seniors gather in a hall bathed in gold lighting, with string quartets playing softly in the background. A place where reputations are cemented, future internships are lined up, and young men in tailored suits practice shaking hands with old money. Nathan had been invited. He called to tell me about it, not to ask me to come, but almost as a performance, as if saying the words out loud kept him tethered to an identity he no longer fully believed in. "They say I'll be seated at the main table," he said, then added, "Dean Wilcox will be there." I simply said, "Sounds important." Inside, I was still, not angry, not vindictive, just watching a man walk a path built on a foundation he'd only now started questioning. The day of the banquet arrived. I wasn't planning to attend, but at the last minute, I was called in for an emergency shift pipe burst in the East Wing. Cleanup needed at Lerner Hall, the same building where the banquet was being held. Fate, it seems, has a sense of timing. I wore my standard uniform, gloves in my back pocket, boots laced. I entered through the service hallway, wheeling my mop bucket past a row of polished doors. And then I heard it faint applause, the sound of silverware against crystal. I peeked through the edge of the curtain. Nathan was on stage, and I'm honored to stand here tonight, representing the kind of excellence Columbia fosters: academic, social, and above all, ethical. I stood quietly, just watching. Then a hand touched my shoulder. It was Dr. Levy. "I didn't know you were working tonight," she said, surprised. "Just a shift," I smiled. She looked back through the curtain. "Isn't that your son?" I nodded. Something flickered in her eyes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a printed program. She flipped it open and pointed to a paragraph near Nathan's name. It read, "Nathan has been entirely self-funded throughout his Ivy League journey, a testament to his independence and determination. Ali." I stared at the page, then looked back at the stage at my son, still smiling, still basking in borrowed light. Dr. Levy's voice cut softly. "I think people deserve to know the truth." I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped back and returned to the utility closet, where I sat for several minutes, heart pounding, thoughts racing. And then I did something I never thought I would. I walked to the front desk and asked the student coordinator if I could say a few words before dessert. He looked at my uniform, hesitated, but Dr. Levy was already behind me. He's earned it. The room was mid-toast when I stepped up. No mic, no announcement, just a father in work boots standing among men in tuxedos. Some gasped, others turned. Puzzled, Nathan's eyes widened. He froze. I cleared my throat. "I won't take long," I said. "But I thought I'd share a story about a young man who stood at this very university, celebrated for his independence, while someone else quietly paid every dollar for him, scrubbed every hallway, missed every holiday, just so he could sit at this table." The room fell silent. I held up the program. "This says he did it alone. That's not true." Nathan stood up, panic creeping into his voice. "Dad, don't..." But I continued, calm as ever. "I don't need credit, never did. But truth matters. And if you're going to talk about ethics, start by living them." I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard whispers ripple through the room. One donor asked the dean, "Is that true?" Another guest murmured, "He paid for Columbia cleaning toilets? That's more impressive than any resume." Nathan didn't follow me out. He couldn't, because in that moment, the shine cracked. The version of himself he'd carefully curated in front of peers and mentors fell apart not with a scream, but with a truth no one could unhear. And that, I realized, was public fall. Not a scandal, a reckoning. It's been a year. The world didn't end. The lights didn't dim. But something fundamental shifted quietly, like the tide receding after a storm. Nathan never went back to that banquet circle. The Vanguard Circle quietly removed his name from its donor-sent brochures. His internship with a prestigious investment firm rescinded. No explanation given. But strangely, none of that seemed to matter to him anymore. A few weeks after the banquet, he came to visit. No suit, no briefcase, just a messenger bag slung over his shoulder and calluses on his fingers. He'd started working at a bike shop part-time while finishing school. He didn't say much at first, just sat at the kitchen table where I used to tape his spelling words every Monday night. Then he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a handwritten letter. In it, he wrote, "You gave me everything, and I gave you nothing but distance. But I see you now. I see what love looks like when it shows up with worn-out boots and split knuckles." There were no grand promises, no emotional outbursts, just acknowledgement and effort. Since then, he's called every Sunday, not to ask for anything, just to check in. We talk about books, about cheap recipes he's learning to cook, about how hard it is to make rent in New York when you're no longer pretending to be rich. He tells me things he never used to say, that he respects what I've done, that he's embarrassed by who he was, that he wants to earn the right to be proud of himself this time, without needing to erase where he came from. And me? I'm still a janitor, still wear the same boots, still know the names of every coffee stain in Lerner Hall. But I walk a little lighter now, not because I got revenge, but because I told the truth, because I reminded someone that love is not invisible just because it's quiet, and because finally someone who used to look past me now meets my eyes when he says, "Thanks, Dad." That's enough, more than enough. Sometimes love doesn't shout. It scrubs floors at 3 a.m. and misses its own meals so someone else can eat. In a world obsessed with image, titles, and prestige, we often forget the quiet sacrifices that built our foundations. Respect is not a birthright, it is earned. And more importantly, it is owed. This story reminds us that dignity isn't tied to the clothes we wear or the job we hold, but to the integrity with which we show up every day for the people we love. And when we fail to recognize that, when we trade humility for pride and gratitude for status, the fall is never loud, but it is certain. So look around. Who has been silently holding you up? Whose hands are calloused from carrying your dreams? Honor them, not because they ask you to, but because someday, when the applause fades and the stage clears, they might be the only ones still standing beside you. What would you do if your own child erased you from his story? This father gave everything: his time, his health, his pride, to make sure his son had a future he could be proud of. And yet, he was repaid with public shame and a cold dismissal. "You're just the janitor." But instead of yelling or seeking revenge, he chose truth. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think he did the right thing by walking away from that final banquet speech? Or should he have done more to hold his son accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What advice would you give this father now that his son has started to change? Should he rebuild the relationship slowly, or set stronger boundaries to protect his peace? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep honoring the invisible sacrifices that make real love possible.